Namaste, pranams to one and all. I am Abhinand from Advaita Academy, and I welcome you all to yet another episode of Conversations on Consciousness. Today, we take great pleasure in introducing our great guest. We have with us Pujya Swami Atmajnananda Ji Maharaj. Swamiji, pranams to your holy feet. We welcome you to this talk on Conversations on Consciousness. So I would like to introduce Swamiji to our audience. Swamiji joined the Vedanta Society of South California in 1981 and spent first 16 years at the branch in the same place, Trabuco Canyon in California. And he received his Brahmacharya vows in 1992 at the famous Belur Math in India. And also his sanyasa diksha was given in 1996 at Belur Math. And he was transferred to the newly formed Vedanta Center at Greater Washington, D.C. in 1997, and he's still present. He's serving in the same branch of Vedanta Center at Washington. So Swamiji, I once again welcome you on behalf of Advaita Academy, and I request your permission to start this interview. And before that, I would start a small invocation prayer. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnuho, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Gurave Sarvalokanam, Bhishaje Bhavaroginam, Nidhaye Sarvavidyanam, Dakshinamurtaye Namaha, Shruti Smriti Purana Nam Alayam Karunalayam, Amami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Yes, Swamiji. So, once again, I would start this interview. Thank you for joining us. So, our first question to you would be, how did Swamiji develop interest in Vedanta? Can you take us through your journey in Vedanta?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long journey. When I was young, I was not very much interested in religion, but very much interested in philosophy. So I entered through the door of philosophy more than through the door of religion. And when I went to university, I studied Western philosophy. And I had an idea that I would continue and get my PhD in Western philosophy and probably be a professor. But something didn't satisfy me completely about Western philosophy. And I decided to take a year off. And I worked for some time, saved some money, and wanted to travel. And mostly through Asia and India. And just to see how other people lived and what brought them happiness. I was a child of the 60s. That meant the civil rights movement in this country and the Vietnam War protest movement and kind of an anti-materialist movement. So I was searching for some type of meaning in life. It wasn't exactly a spiritual journey at that time, but it turned into a spiritual journey. So by the time I got to India, I was very much interested in learning about meditation and something of the Indian philosophy. When I got to New Delhi, I went into a bookstore and I asked for a copy of Bhagavad Gita. It was the one book that I knew was very important. And by chance or by providence, the bookseller gave me a copy that was published by the Advaita Ashrama of the Ramakrishna order. It was a translation of Swami Swarupanandaji. He was a direct disciple of Swami Vivekananda. So through reading Gita, this was the first, you can say, big turning point for me. I was very much attracted, of course, to the teachings. And without having any teacher or anything, I began some serious type of meditation, just following the teachings of Gita. Now, on the book jacket, the dust cover of the Gita, there was a quotation from Swami Vivekananda that Gita represents a bouquet of the most beautiful flowers from the Upanishad. And so traveling, of course, the dust jacket got lost and everything, but I remember that name, Vivekananda. And in those days, I was really filled with some type of vairagya. So I didn't like to spend any money. I traveled third-class train and sometimes even hitchhiked. And so I got to Chennai, Madras in those days. And It was my 24th birthday. So I wanted to buy myself a present. And as I say, I didn't like to spend any money. So I walked into a bookstore looking for some very inexpensive little book to buy. And I saw on the bottom shelf the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. And that reminded me, I remembered the name from the cover of the Gita that I had been reading. So I bought that book. So this was another major turning point for me, reading the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. It was like a shock to my system. I had never seen such profound depth of thought and such a compassionate, loving heart, and so much love of his country and seeing God in everything. So I was really very much moved by reading that. And there was a long introduction telling about the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Sharada Devi and the whole movement. So I decided that I should go to Kolkata, in those days, Calcutta, of course. And I had a great desire to find out more about this Ramakrishna order. Now, when I went to Calcutta, again, by chance or by providence, I happened to meet a young Bengali man who became very friendly towards me, invited me to his home. He was unmarried. He lived with his parents and sisters. And so I went and had lunch there. They were very kind to me, and they invited me to stay with them. So I ended up living there. Just this son of the family, he was also very austere, just in a small room. We both slept on the floor there, but they were also great devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. And I told them at the very beginning, I had a tremendous desire to visit Dakshineswar, where Sri Ramakrishna enacted his divine play, and Belur Math. So one day we decided that we would go there. And in those days, we did everything on foot. We walked everywhere. And I had these, inexpensive chappals, Hawaii chappals that got torn sometime. I never bothered to buy any new ones. So I went barefoot everywhere. And it was a very hot day, and it's a very long walk. We walked all the way from South Calcutta to Belur Math. And by the time we got there, we walked up to the main gate, and I saw it was locked. I was very, very disappointed, very sad, of course. There's a long line of people waiting there and everything. So I walked all the way to the front just to see what the situation was. And as soon as I reached the gatekeeper opened the gate, as if he had been waiting for me. This is how it felt. But by chance, it was 4 o'clock. It was just when I had no idea what time it was. It must have taken about 6 hours walking. So I felt that they were just waiting for me to come. So then immediately the two of us, we went for a bath in the Ganga. We were exhausted, of course, and we visited all of the temples. And then just as the sun was going down, we took this ferry across the Ganga to the Dakshineswar. And we got there just at sunset when all of the arati was going on in the different temples. There are 3 different main temples there, Bhavatarani, and this Radhakanta temple, and then these Shiva temples are there. And so a tremendous atmosphere. We could hear the blowing of the conch shells and the gongs and the arati, bell going and everything, and went into Sri Ramakrishna's room. And again, this was another great turning point. I really felt something very special going into his room, and felt some very strong type of connection. So this was you could say the third thing. First reading Bhagavad Gita, and then teachings of Swami Vivekananda, and then going to the Belur Math and going to Dakshineswar. So after that, I bought all the books that I could find. I went back to the States, and I didn't know about any of our Vedanta centers at that time. So I didn't know exactly what to do. I happened to meet one Swami of the order who had left the order and was working independently. That was my first contact. Later, I found out about our New York center and others. But still, I didn't know what to do exactly. I felt a little drawn towards monastic life, but I didn't know what to do exactly. So I had a relative who had a neighbor who was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in South Asian Studies Department. And because of my interest in South Asian studies, I went to see him to see if there was some type of position or job, research assistant, something that I could do there. And he said, no, there's with just a bachelor degree, there's nothing you can do here. Why not go for a doctorate? So I wasn't really interested at this point. I knew I wanted to really follow the monastic life. That was my real desire. But I also had a great desire to learn Bengali so I could read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in the original, and to study Sanskrit so I could read the Gita, Upanishads, and other scriptures like that. So I met with the department, and it was a week before classes started. There wasn't time to get accepted into any big program, but the head of the department, he was very kind. He said, sign up for some classes. If you do well, we'll see if we can transfer you to the program and we'll give you full scholarship. So that's what happened. So so I continued. I took all philosophy and Bengali, Sanskrit courses and everything. And then I made connection with some other devotees and eventually our New York Center and everything. So I had a good connection with the Ramakrishna mission at that time. And this was a period I didn't do anything. I didn't mix with people at all. I spent all of my time with the studies or spiritual practice. Then in 1978, I had a fellowship to stay in India for 1 year, again in Calcutta. And at that time, I became very close with one of our Swamis, Swami Lokeshwarananda. He was the head of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture at that time. And he encouraged me very much to formally apply to join the order as a sannyasi. So I did it at that time. He wanted me to stay with him in Calcutta. But the general secretary of the order, he said two things. One, you have to finish your dissertation, finish your degree, get your PhD. And number two, he said, you write to the Swami in Southern California and ask to join there. If you want to come to India later, you can do it, but join in the States first. Now, the Swami in Southern California, Swami Swahanandaji, I knew from earlier trip. I was very, very fond of him and everything. So that's what happened. I wrote to him and he said, yes, you finish your studies, get your PhD, and then you can come and join. So it took me another 1.5 years. So then I joined in 1981. So that's more or less the story.
That's a wonderful story and very inspiring. The many facets, especially how you reached India, walked all the way from South Calcutta to Belur Math, and the struggle you have undergone to achieve Vedantic knowledge is something which is inspiring to all of us. Thank you for that, Swamiji. On the same note, I also want to know about, because now you are a monk in the Ramakrishna order. So I want to know about the importance of sannyasa ashrama and who should take up sannyasa ashrama. On the importance of sannyasa ashrama is something which I would like to know from you.
Yeah. In the West, we have this concept of a vocation or a calling. And honestly speaking, I don't know if I exactly chose this life or I was called to this life. When we look back and we see how circumstances lead from one thing to another, and we get inspired by certain people, we meet certain holy people, and as I say, because I bought that one copy of Gita, and it led me to Swami Vivekananda, and it led me to Calcutta. So one thing led to another, and really reading Swamiji and reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and having the company of so many sadhus when I was in India. Really, holy company is the main thing. The company of these great souls, then something awakens. Either it does or it doesn't. And this vairagya, we talk about vairagya sometimes in negative terms. Oh, it means a little dispassion. You're not attracted to the world, this and that. But actually, Vairagya is a very positive, very strong thing. It becomes like a burning fire, and you really just want to renounce everything. So that spirited Vairagya came upon me, and what happened really, I was reading the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and there was, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but the recorder of the Gospel was someone named Mahendranath Gupta, and he was a householder. And his whole life, he had that struggle and that doubt in his mind. He had this tremendous longing to renounce everything, but he had married when he was younger. And Sri Ramakrishna said, no, you remain in the world. You be an example of the world. But it was always a struggle in his mind, pulled in two different directions. And I decided if I really wanted to follow the Vedanta, I didn't want to have that struggle in my mind. Either I do it 100% or I don't do it at all. And as I say, this spirited Vairagya became very strong within me. So I think it's a question of temperament. Swami Vivekananda has a very beautiful lecture in his Karma Yoga. It says each is great in its own place. So if he was asked which is greater, the householder life or the sannyasa life, each has its own greatness. And it's all a question of our samskaras and a question of grace. We don't know why some are chosen for life of sannyasa and some for the householder life. But there has to be, as I say, this tremendous feeling of vairagya. There's a desire to lead a life of service. In our order, especially, we're very service-oriented. And other than that qualifications, of course, there has to be a little bit of dispassion, not too much of a desire for worldly enjoyment. And if there's a desire, hidden desire for family and children and enjoyment, then it becomes a great struggle, the life of sannyasa, pulled in two different directions. So those who have a smooth monastic life generally don't have much desire, even from a young age, for married life and career. The whole time I was doing my PhD, everyone else was thinking about a future academic career. It never occurred to me. I had no interest in that. So, you know, the scriptures in the old days, there were many of these teachings of Dharma Shastras that said sannyasa is only after the married life. It has to be the fourth ashrama. And there were others who say, no, after Brahmacharya, you can go directly to sannyasa. And then one famous verse from, I think, Jabal Upanishad is, Yahada eva virajet, tadahar eva pravrajet. Very famous verse, we all know that at any stage of life, even in the middle of a householder life, doesn't matter what it is. If that tremendous vairagya comes, then you're, that very day, you can renounce everything. So the ancient tradition was also a very sensible tradition, that a householder life was when one got to fulfill certain desires and to see the unfulfilling nature of desires and reach that point where they were ready to renounce and then become vanaprasthins and then sannyasins. That was also a very nice tradition. But those who feel that longing to renounce at an early age, for them, this is the best path. For others, the householder path is the best path. So it's not a question of one better than the other. It's a question of adhikara, what one is fit for.
That's again beautifully narrated by Swamiji. Thank you for that, because if we didn't have Narendranath Datta, we wouldn't have known about Swami Ramakrishna. And if we didn't have a Mahendranath Gupta, we wouldn't have known about Gospel of Ramakrishna. So Swamiji has highlighted on the importance of both Sannyasa Ashrama and Grihastha Ashrama. Of course, he has also given us the insight on developing intense Vairagya for which is very much required for sannyasa, using the Jabal Upanishad Shruti. The moment you feel like surrendering the world and letting go of the world, and the moment you have this intense dispassion, that's when you take up sannyasa. Thank you for that, Swamiji. It is indeed insightful. So moving on to our next question, Swamiji, you mentioned in the introduction about your doctoral thesis, which you had done and which you were asked to do by Swami Swahananda, if I am right, on which you were pursuing, and they asked you to complete your doctoral thesis and then join the ashram. So can you, I mean, we have come to know that your doctoral thesis was on Oriental Studies. So can you please shed more light about this doctoral research which you had done in your Purvashrama days?
Yeah. My main goal when I was doing this postgraduate work was just for, as I said, to learn the languages so that I would have access to the original scriptures. And also, I wanted to learn more about Vedanta. My interest was really Advaita Vedanta and Upanishads and everything. And generally, when PhD students choose their dissertation topic, they choose it very carefully because this will be the springboard to their future career. Generally, the first book will be that, and then they'll be known for that and everything. I had no interest in academics, so I went to my advisor and I said, "You choose a topic for me that will be a good, easy topic that will enable me to use both my skills in Bengali and also in Sanskrit." And I didn't really care. I didn't want to do anything that I was too personally involved with. So I purposely stayed away from anything with the Ramakrishna order or Swamiji or anything like that. And so my advisor is the one who chose the topic for me. He said the Vaishnava studies will enable you to use your Bengali and also your Sanskrit. And he said that there's an important text that was written by Jiva Goswami. It was Tattva Sandarbha. And he said this has never been translated. It'll be a good, easy topic for you. You can translate that. You can do some type of commentary and study and historical study on that and everything. So I said, fine. That was fine. I didn't have any special interest in that topic. I found it to be very interesting and helpful after I worked on it. So it was good for me. But it was really just for a very practical reason that I chose that topic. So my work, the Oriental Studies, of course, they don't use this word Oriental Studies anymore. Now it has kind of a pejorative meaning, kind of colonial meaning. They've changed the name, but in those days they called it Oriental Studies. So my interest was just to go deeper into the philosophy and everything. But then, in order to get my degree, I had to do the dissertation. So this Tattva Sandarbha, I'll be, I think, combining a couple of your questions together. I'll talk about the topic. The Jiva Goswami, there were 6 Goswamis. They were all, the main, actually 5 of them were disciples of Chaitanya Deva himself. Jiva Goswami was the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan, so he was really their disciple. The others, especially Sanatan and Rupa Goswami, they wrote all the books on bhakti. And they asked Jiva Goswami, you write something on the philosophy so that we'll have a fixed philosophi for this Gaudiya Vaishnava movement, Chaitanya movement. So he wrote something called Shat Sandarbha. The word Sandarbha simply means a volume. In 6 volumes, the whole philosophy. And Tattva Sandarbha is the first and introductory one. There's Tattva Sandarbha and actually Shat Sandarbha. These are all based on a single verse from the Bhagavata Purana. It's very interesting. He took one verse from Bhagavata Purana and he expanded that into 6 volumes of philosophy, which is called the Achintya Bheda Bhedavada. That's the term they use for their school of Vedanta. This verse says, Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yajnanavadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. A very beautiful verse. And surprisingly, a very Advaitic verse. We think of Bhagavata and the dualistic devotional movement, but it says Vadanti tat tattva vidas, tattva vids. So the knowers of truth, they call truth, Vadanti, yajnanavadvayam, that non-dual knowledge or consciousness. This is what they call truth, but they give it 3 different names. So that same non-dual pure consciousness, which the knowers of truth consider to be the highest truth, is called Bhagavan, the personal God, Paramatma, the individual soul, and Brahman. So the Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So the transcendent ultimate reality of Brahman, Paramatman, that same reality dwelling within, and personal God. So the other 5, so tattva, you'll see the word tattva is in that verse, tattvavid. Then we have the Brahmas, and all of them will have the Bhagavad or Paramatman. He took all of the Sandarbhas were named after the different terms that are found in that one verse. So that was what I did for my dissertation. And this Achintya Bhedavada, it's very nice, actually nice philosophy. All of these schools of Vedanta really are based on this relationship between Jivatman and Paramatman. So according to Advaita Vedanta, there's ultimately no distinction. There's ultimate oneness. The different schools, the different type of relationship. Some the dualistic, they'll be separate. The Bhedavadas, there's yes, distinct but one. So the individual self, from one point of view, from the point of view of substance, consciousness, the same consciousness, that the same light that's in a ray of light is in the sun itself. From that point of view, the same. And yet they're all each ray is distinct from the other and separate from the sun. So both abheda, non-different, and Veda different, in a relationship that transcends our ability to rationally understand achintya. So achintya bheda bhedavada. It's a very nice doctrine. The reason I mention it is because the Chaitanya school slowly deviated from this, I feel, and became highly dualistic. And they don't like anything that sounds like Advaita. But this really is a nice mix of Dvaita and Advaita, that original philosophy. So that was a very nice text, many quotes. They take the Bhagavata Purana, they call it the Panchama Veda. They take that, have the same authority as the Vedas. So all of the authoritative verses that they refer to will be verses from the Bhagavata, some Vishnu Purana, some others, but mostly the Bhagavata. That becomes the most important. And they have another nice doctrine that there's also a Panchama Purushartha or Parama Purushartha, which is Bhakti or Prema. So they say that greater than Mukti, greater than liberation, is devotion. And this we find, of course, in Narada Bhakti Sutras and other texts, that devotion is even something greater than Mukti. And they don't really like this idea of Mukti very much. They talk about 5 different types of Mukti, this Samipya and Sadhanamya, Sarupya, all of these things. And this Ayudhya, merging in God, it's considered the lowest for them. They want to have a little distinction. They want to enjoy the presence of God, and they have that feeling of devotion. So this is the attitude that they take in their spiritual life that way. Even if there may be a possibility of oneness, that they want to have this little separation. We find this in the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna also to a certain extent, a little bit of separation to enjoy that relationship of devotee and object of devotion.
Swamiji, thanks. That's really more information we could collect and gather from Swamiji's talk on Tattva Sandarbha, and really nice to know that one verse of Srimad Bhagavatam has been taken on and commented as 6 different volumes, and each elaborating on that. Swamiji, and you also mentioned about how Gaudiya Vaishnavism has slowly drifted towards dualistic principles. So would you tell that the present Gaudiya Vaishnavism, or maybe even the Chaitanya school of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which was the initial Gaudiya Vaishnavism, do you say that it's totally different from Advaita Vedanta? If yes, how? or if you would, want to tell where want to compare between the schools, two schools, I would really appreciate and I'll be thankful.
Okay. Yeah, this was actually, when I started my study of this Tattva Sandarbha, there were two main commentaries. One was someone named Baladeva Vidyabhushan, and the other was someone, Radha Mohan. I don't remember if he had a title or not. And I saw there was a big difference in the way they were explained the different verses. And this Baladeva, he interpreted everything from a highly dualistic point of view. So, and I wondered why they were so different. So it became a bit of a historical study. It wasn't just a translation of a philosophical text. I got a little interested in that. And it turned out this is Baladeva Vidyabhushan. He played a very important role within the movement. Now, the tradition was, in those days and even today, in order to be considered a full-fledged Vedantic Sampradaya, you have to show that there are commentaries on the Prasthanatraya, on Gita, Upanishad, Brahma Sutra. And the Chaitanya tradition didn't have any of these. So this Baladeva played a very important role because he wanted to have the tradition considered a legitimate sampradaya. So he wrote commentaries on Brahma Sutra, some of the Upanishads and the Gita, and he made an attempt to explain everything from a dualistic point of view and to show some connection with Madhva. He wanted to show that they were almost an offshoot, that there was some historical connection with Madhva, which wasn't really there. When we read the life of Chaitanya Deva, there are several Bengali biographies, very nice biographies. When he traveled actually to Udupi and went to the Madhva Mutt there, he was a little bit critical of them. We don't find him embracing them. They were a little too ritualistic for him. And of course, when he went anywhere, he did two things. If he saw any real legitimate spirituality, he embraced it. So, and when he saw anything that was a little too ritualistic or a little bit mechanical or something, then he would try to correct it. So when he went to North India, and he would have arguments with the Advaitins. But other places he would appreciate what they said. One example is this Bhagavata Purana. The main commentary is written by Sridhara Swami, and Sridhara Swami was a monk of the Shankaracharya order. He was part of the Dashanami Sampradaya. So anyhow, he praised his commentary. People said, "Why don't you write a commentary?" And he said, already the Swami has done it, so there shouldn't be a second one. So he had no prejudice or bias against anyone, against the Advaitins or any special. We see this distinction between the acharyas and the what we can call the more saintly types of figures. That the acharyas, their mission was to establish a position, to establish one of the different schools of Vedanta, and those other types of figures who became more saintly, very often they were kind of poet saints that we, Tulsidas, Guru Nanak, Mirabai, and everything. We find generally that they didn't make these big distinctions. Very often they didn't like caste distinctions, and they tried to. So there was a kind of Bhakti Renaissance movement like that. So Chaitanya Deva belonged to that school more, I felt, that he wasn't really sectarian, but as Baladeva, in order to establish them as a sampradaya, he had to connect them to an existing sampradaya. He did that through Madhva, and he had that bend of mind. He was more of a Advaitin, of a Dvaitin, of a dualist. So he is the one And because he did a great service to the tradition by legitimizing them in the eyes of others, otherwise they were looked down as kind of second class. His interpretation, his dualistic interpretation, became more of a standard type of interpretation. Then in more modern times, I think the most highly dualistic interpretation was by the ISKCON school, the Krishna consciousness school and everything, where they really took a very hostile view towards Advaita Vedanta and emphasized worship of Krishna alone. It will take you to the highest. And so there is a historical, we can really see a storyline, how it went from, because Radharamo and his commentary doesn't show any bias towards dualistic or non-dualistic. It's just a very nice, clear interpretation of it. And as Baladeva, we can definitely see an agenda behind it. And so that's how it seemed to go more and more into as a dualistic direction.
Okay. So that is, thank you for this, Swamiji. Of course, as you highlighted, we all know how Gaudiya Vaishnavism has been, has turned more dualistic, and at least the ISKCON Gaudiya Vaishnavism has turned totally dualistic. So when you mentioned about Bhakti being the Parama Purushartha in the present day Gaudiya Vaishnavism order, do you tell that Bhakti is not, doesn't find a place in Advaita, or what is the role of Bhakti in Advaita, if you can elaborate? This is just an offshoot question because you mentioned it and it was very pertinent observation which you made to us.
Yeah. Of course, Advaita Vedanta also has different schools and there's different, And so I would say the most severe type of Advaitin probably will not find the same scope for Bhakti as other schools might. Now, we look at the life of Sri Ramakrishna, and he practiced all different schools. We can't really pinpoint and we can't really pigeonhole him. But if we have to try to find a school that he seems to fit in best, I would say it would be the Shakta tradition. Now, the Shakta tradition, worship of God as Divine Mother. Worship of God as Divine Mother can be understood as a type of Advaita Vedanta with a kind of personal God. Now, the reason I say that is that in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we see that he accepted this idea that the ultimate truth is oneness. And he said through every path, through a devotional path, through karma yoga, through jnana yoga, it doesn't matter, that everyone will reach that same point of oneness, is unity. And for him, and we see the same thing in Gita, actually, Bhagavad Gita, we read chapter 12 of Gita, that through bhakti also one will reach the same goal as through the path of jnana yoga. Jnana yoga really means Advaita Vedanta for most people. That it's come to mean that. It doesn't have to, but that's how we generally understand it. So for Sri Ramakrishna, the personalizing of God is something that we do to a certain extent. And he has many beautiful illustrations of how we do this. One of his analogies is people taking water from a pond. There's a reservoir, and people go, and there are different bathing ghats. There'll be some for the Muslims, some for Christians, some for Hindus. They'll all have their separate places of going, and they'll all take that water in their different type of container. Hindus will use a pitcher, Muslims will use some type of sack, and the Christians, maybe they'll use a bucket, and they'll all use different names. So he says the Hindus, they'll say jal, the Muslims will say pani, Christians will say water. And he says the substance is the same. Substance is the same, but they give their own name to it. And if we look at the nature of water, it takes the shape of that container. So he says we want to, water itself has two qualities. It's very interesting. Thakur uses this example of water. Somebody asked him one time, you know, what is Brahman like? And he says, usually he said, what Brahman is like, we can't say, but this time he says, like water. Now, water is formless, and yet it takes the shape of its container. It is formless, it has no form of its own, yet is never found without a form. Even in a lake, and it takes the top will be flat, the bottom will be take the form of the riverbed or lake bed, whatever. So Thakur says that if we want to access this nameless, formless reality, water in its formless, we have to use a picture, and we have to take it out. That picture will be whatever concept of our mind, whatever however we like to see God. These are really basic teachings that we find in Bhagavad Gita. And in whatever way people approach me, I'll reveal myself in that way. So this, because Advaita Vedanta, because this Brahman has no form of its own and no name of its own, it can take any form and any name. It can be approached that way because the human mind has to grasp it somehow. Now, the other option is we simply dive into the ocean. We don't use any container to take it out. We simply dive in. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he had no agenda. Everything for him was what teaching was appropriate. He liked all of the different schools. There's a beautiful conversation with Swami Vivekananda. Of course, he was Narendra before he became a Swami. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, he said, suppose that there's a cup filled with sweet syrup, and you're a fly, and you want to drink some of that syrup. What will you do? So Narendra said, I'll land on the rim, on the edge of that cup, and I'll lean over and I'll drink the nectar from that. So Thakur said to him, oh, why won't you simply fly into it? He said, if I fly into it, I'll die. I'll drown in that nectar. So I want to stay on the edge and lean over. So then Sri Ramakrishna said to him, no, my child, this is the nectar of immortality. No one dies in it, one becomes immortal. So that means that Sri Ramakrishna understood Swamiji was fit, was uniquely fit for this path of Advaita Vedanta and merging in the infinite, absolute, nameless, formless reality. Other people, he would say yes, that keep a little distance and enjoy that relationship. So, and Swamiji, of course, he had a devotional heart also. He became a great devotee of Mother Kali towards the end of his life, as he got older, more and more. So if we understand that this infinite absolute reality is very difficult for the mind to grasp. We can't do it. We either dive into it, that means we have to transcend this mind. Otherwise, we have to give it a name and a form, and that'll be a great aid in meditation, and it allows us to have some devotion also. Now, the second thing is that the Shaktas, they'll say this infinite, absolute, nameless, formless of Brahman is not a complete understanding of the nature of Brahman. That we have to understand that Brahman has a Shakti. Now, the Advaitins get around this a little bit with the idea of Maya. And they'll say that there's a Maya. We don't really have to explain it because it'll disappear. It's not a vastu, the way that Brahman is. You ask, where does it come from? Have some knowledge, you'll see it'll vanish. So it's not absolutely unreal because of that we see this universe, and it's not absolutely real because it'll disappear with God realization. Now the Shaktas take a little bit more of a realistic view of this Maya. They'll refer to it more as Shakti, as a power inherent in Brahman. If Brahman is actionless and if Brahman is transcendent and pure consciousness, then they'll say, how do we account for even the appearance of the universe? Forget about the real universe. Even if you say it's unreal, it's like a dream. How do we account for the appearance of the dream? There has to be at least some dream Shakti. There has to be something which will allow this Brahman to manifest itself as this universe. It's actually much closer to the Upanishadic teachings that we have. The Advaitic theories of Jagat Mithya, the Mithyata of this world, In the Upanishads, it's more that this universe is really Chinmaya. It's really the consciousness, the projection out of Brahman, not so much the illusory or dreamlike. This was emphasized, of course, to a great extent by Gaudapada and Shankaracharya to a certain extent also. Sri Ramakrishna always emphasized this idea of anitya. Whenever he talks about this Brahman is real, he'll say Brahman, Satya he'll use, but he'll say this universe is anitya, that it's transitory, fleeting, not that it's avastu. So he uses vastu and avastu. Avastu has a philosophical meaning, but it also has a very practical meaning. We can say that it means, well, from the point of view of real substance, there's no substance to it. But he stressed this other meaning, that insubstantial, it can't satisfy our wants and our needs. That way, the vastu and avastu, that we can say with a person, someone is a really substantial person. They have some character to them. Someone that doesn't have that, insubstantial. So he looked at the world in those terms a little bit. So the Shaktas, now that they've added Shakti to it, then this is the female principle. So now we have this idea of looking upon God as mother, and this relationship of the child to the mother. So now we have this devotional attitude that comes into it. Now, this play between Advaita Vedanta and a dualistic attitude in the Shakti tradition is explained very beautifully. There's a song by the great poet saint Ram Prasad. Ram Prasad, he played a very important role in the Shakti tradition in Bengal, because before that, worship of Mother Kali, especially. Before that, Mother Kali represented a very terrible form of the Divine Mother, very fearsome. You had to do all this balidana and animal sacrifice and everything. But he changed everything around. For him, this was this what they call the Shontan Bhava, that the devotee takes the attitude of a small child and looks upon Mother Kali as a loving mother, a very sweet relationship. So everything got turned around a little bit. It was no longer fear and a fearsome and bloodthirsty Divine Mother. It was a very loving mother. Now, he has one beautiful song where he says, Ami chini hote chai na ma, ami chini khete bhalobashi. I don't want to become sugar, I want to taste sugar. Now, the significance is, the real dualists will say that it's impossible to become sugar. That means I don't want to be merged in Brahman. They'll say it's impossible, it's a dualistic devotional teaching, that I have a relationship with God, but I'm separate from God. Maybe a part of God, but not one with God. So they'll say, no, it's impossible. But Ram Prasad is saying that I know that that's the ultimate truth, oneness. But how can I enjoy the taste of sugar if I'm one with sugar? So let me have a slight feeling of separation so I can enjoy the taste of it. So this is how this devotional attitude comes in the Shakti tradition, without denying the absolute oneness of the Jivatman and Paramatman. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say that because of this ego is like a stick on the surface of water. It doesn't really separate one side from the other. There's always oneness underlying this dualistic relationship, always oneness underlying it. But because of this stick of ego, I feel I'm on one side and God is on the other side, and I can worship God that way. So this is how especially the Shaktas, worshippers of the Divine Mother, they can have a devotional attitude superimposed on the ground of oneness, of the Advaita.
Swamiji, thank you for your the knowledge which you gave on how the non-dualistic, the dualistic schools, dualistic schools don't accept Sayujya Bhakti, but how even certain Advaita Vedantic schools also, not that they reject Sayujya Bhakti, but they have an use of Sayujya Bhakti later, but they use the other forms of Sayujya Mukti, I'm sorry, the Mukti. Sayujya Mukti they use other forms of mukti. They treat that as a goal, and then they slightly orient themselves towards Sayujya Mukti, but not definitive and precise Sayujya Mukti as Srimad Gaudapadacharya or Sri Adi Shankaracharya defines Mukti. Thank you for that, Swamiji. Moving on, Swamiji, I would like to know some of the favorite teachings of Sri Adi Shankaracharya, which Swamiji prefers to give to his shishyas and has relevance even to this day of materialism and consumerism.
Yeah, I'm very, very fond of his Bhaja Govinda. This is my favorite hymn, and of course the version by Subbalakshmi is so beautiful. When I was a college student, this was one of the very few things I had. I had a little cassette tape recorder, and I used to play that over and over again. This some people may think Bhaja Govindam, this is a devotional hymn, but it's really all about Vedanta and all about the transitory nature of the world. So I'm very, very fond of that. Philosophically, and in Shankaracharya's Vivekananda, there's a very long section on the Panchakosha doctrine. And this we find just in a very brief form in Taittiriya Upanishad and other places, but Shankaracharya really devotes a very large portion of that text to the explanation of this Panchakosha doctrine, and two ideas in particular that I think are the most important in Advaita Vedanta: the concept of upadhi and adhyasa. These two concepts. This upadhi, of course you know all of this, but upadhi generally means any quality that belongs to a substance, but it can be something that's added on afterwards. So if somebody becomes a doctor, then this doctor, that upadhi will be there. That can be added to it. So something that's added onto it. In Advaita Vedanta, it goes one step further, that it's an attribute which seems to belong to something, but actually belongs to something else. They're very, very helpful doctrine. They give many examples. One nice example: if you have a crystal vase, and behind that you put a red rose, then the redness of the rose will be seen in the vase. So if you look at the vase, you'll say, oh, it's a red vase. The redness belongs to it. Now, if it actually belonged to it, when we remove the rose, it'll remain red. But we find that it doesn't belong to it at all. So this whole concept of adhyasa, one thing gets superimposed, and upadhi gets superimposed on the nature of the self. So these five different koshas, these five different coverings, Annamaya kosha and others, through false identification, they appear to be characteristics of the self, of the Atman, and yet do not belong to it at all. In fact, they belong to the exact opposite. So this adhyasa, it works on two ways. We attribute the attributes of one thing to another, and the second thing to the first one. So it works both ways. For example, if you're ever sitting in a train and the train next to you starts to move, and you get the feeling that you're moving. So we're attributing movement to the train that we're on, which is not moving at all. And we're attributing stationariness to the other train, which is actually moving. Or Shankaracharya gives the example of that we see the moon and there are clouds in front of the moon, and it looks as if the moon is moving, but it's actually the cloud that's moving. So we're attributing movement to the cloud, to the moon, which is relatively stationary, and non-movement to the cloud, which is actually moving. So with this pure consciousness, we're not seeing that as the self. We're attributing these other ideas that we projected outside of ourselves, as a personal God and everything, and the real self. And we attribute this I-ness to the mind, and it doesn't belong to that. I-ness to the body, the mind, we identify with all of these koshas. So the process of Advaita Vedanta will be the superimposition, that realizing that I'm not this body, the mind. Now, what I like best about Shankaracharya's interpretation is his interpretation of this Vijnanamaya Kosha. This is also very interesting, that he says that this Vijnanamaya Kosha is responsible for ahankara, for this I sense. Now, in other systems, Sankhya, for example, there's ahankara. It's considered to be kind of a structure within mental consciousness. We have our ahankara, we have a buddhi, we have manas, we have chitta. We have these four elements of the aspects of the antakarana. Now, Shankaracharya explains very beautifully that this I is nothing real. It's not a structure. It's nothing. It's false identification. It emerges, and it emerges specifically out of this Vijnanamaya Kosha, because we see in, say, lower animals that the mind will be working very well. They may have a very good mind. It can distinguish all sorts of things, far more than our minds can. We can't distinguish between all different types of scents. Say the odors compared to a dog, they can distinguish very clearly all different types of smells in the air. We can do it, very little bit. Their minds are and senses are more highly developed from that point of view. But this Vijnanamaya Kosha is not there, so they don't have that sense of I'm the one who's doing it. If they do, that means the Vijnanamaya Kosha is there a little bit, but that's responsible for that. So the sense of I comes from this false identification with and some type of self-awareness, false identification with all these external things. Kathopanishad explains that because the senses go outward, the mind goes outward, and it doesn't turn back in on itself, so we don't know the real I. So there's a pure consciousness that identifies with the external thing. So we say, I'm the body, I'm the mind, the senses. So to me, that Shankaracharya's interpretation of the real significance of all these different koshas is something very, very important, especially how this sense of I emerges out of this Vijnanamaya kosha. And we see even in an individual, we sometimes get the impression that we're born with these five koshas. Actually, we're born with the Annamaya kosha, and the senses are also very undeveloped when we're born. So the Pranamaya kosha, that we have to reach a certain age before we can really see things clearly, and hearing, we don't have that very early. The Manomaya kosha, we have to really get to maybe 3 years old, 4 years old before we're really thinking. And to have some reflexive thought, to be able to really know that I'm an individual, I can do this, I can do that, that comes later. So this Vijnanamaya kosha comes later. This is where we'll get to this idea of self-will later, but this is where that sense of being able to make decisions comes. The Vijnanamaya kosha is really a buddhi, this nishtayatmika buddhi, that it can make decisions, decide what to do and what not to do. Otherwise, the mind works more mechanically. Something comes in, the mind will make a decision, and it'll go out. But when this Vijnanamaya kosha, in the sense of I, develops, then we're considered to be responsible adults. This is why in the legal system that they'll have different standards for children. If a child commits a sin, a crime, they won't be punished the same way an adult will be, because they're not considered to have that sense of responsibility. That means the Vijnanamaya kosha hasn't been fully developed yet. So these different koshas, they develop through time. And our sense of I and our sense of responsibility and everything that comes through the development of this Vijnanamaya kosha. So that's my favorite section from the Shankaracharya's Vivekananda, which is my favorite text of his also.
Oh, yeah, that was about to be my next question, which is which are the few granthas which Swamiji would prefer teaching it to his shishyas and disciples who come seeking for knowledge. So some granthas which you recommend for initial seekers?
Yeah. Gita, of course. The Bhagavad Gita is essential. Then, among the Upanishads, my personal favorites are the Kathopanishad, which was Swami Vivekananda's favorite, and the Mundaka Upanishad. Mundaka Upanishad has, just because there's so many beautiful verses in it. Of course, all the Upanishads are very important. Brahma Sutras, we generally don't recommend for those who are not really scholars. There's more of a scholarly value to that. In our tradition, of course, this Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, this Kotamrita in Bengali, this is our most important text. And there's also Maya Kotha, the teaching of Holy Mother. This is very important. And the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. And there's so many other nice reminiscences and recorded talks and lectures and things of the other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. So I think these probably for us will be the most important scriptures to study. Nothing else is coming to my mind right now. Anything you would suggest?
No. I'm no one to suggest, Swamiji. I think, if at all I should suggest people to watch this interview and learn from Swamiji's holy words. Swamiji, on this note, like for seekers, initial seekers, what should be done by a seeker to develop intense vairagya and become a mumukshu so that he progresses on the path of mukti, liberation? So what are the essential characteristics of a spiritual disciple, and what should be done to develop those characteristics and maintain the same characteristics as well throughout the journey of Vedanta?
Yeah. The vairagya, first of all, there has to be a desire for vairagya. Otherwise, no one will seek it. Most people, if you tell them that this is the great joy in vairagya, they'll say, how can there be a great joy in that? I'm giving up everything. So this is a question of samskaras to a large extent. Unless we're born with some appreciation for that ideal, it's very hard for us to, we don't seek it, we won't get it. Now we may seek love of God, we may seek union with God, but this vairagya, it has to just come upon somebody. You know, the Kathopanishad I mentioned before, this beautiful character of Nachiketa. We read that this Shraddha entered into him. It's the same thing with vairagya. It has to enter into someone. Now, I can mention three ways that it happens very often. One is through tremendous tragedy. We lose a loved one, or personal health happens, or some shock to the system. We lose our job. Something happens, and we look back on that and say, this was a great lesson for me. That the things that I've been looking forward to in life that I thought will fulfill my desires, they can be gone in a minute. So this is one way that many people, that they have to undergo some type of suffering in order for this to really develop. Or we can observe somebody else. This is the easier way, but it's not so surefire. But if we watch other people and we say, look, this person, a whole life has been about earning money and having enjoyments, but I see their life just gets more and more cluttered and complicated. I don't see that they can really enjoy these things. So we can learn that way. Then third thing is holy company. Holy company. You know, in the beginning of Vivek Chudamani, Shankaracharya, he talks about these three things that come through the grace of God. And there's human birth, of course, this is one. And then this mumukshutvam, this longing for liberation. But the third, this mahapurusha samsraya, this the company of a great soul. This is the positive side of vairagya. See, if we only know the negative side of what we're giving up, and we don't see what we get in return, when we see these all renouncing sadhus, and what joy they have, and what freedom they have, and not possessing anything, and how they can feel oneness with everyone, then we see that there's something very positive about it, and that we can get inspired to that. So I would say, unfortunately, one of the means is some tragedy that comes in our lives, the loss of a loved one or something, or we can just observe other people. But the greatest help, of course, if the touch of these great souls, we that vairagya, it's like a fire that we can catch from them. So and of course, the more we do spiritual practice, the deeper we go in meditation, the more we start to realize that inner reality has a level of reality that's greater than this external reality, and that longing comes for that. But really, I think the greatest help is the holy company. If we see someone, they don't have to be a Brahmagyani, they don't have to be a God-realized soul. If they've spent a lifetime in leading a life of renunciation and calling on God, and it's brought great conviction to their lives and great contentment and great joy in their lives, then we'll feel that, we'll feel attracted to that. So the holy company is really one of the greatest aids in spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna was often asked, what are the means of God realization? And very often he would say the sadhu sangha, he would mention that first. Then second thing, very often he would mention is solitude, that he would say, go off in solitude. Then when we're alone, we can intensify our spiritual life. And he would say, call on God with great yearning. This, he emphasized this vyakulata. He used this term. This was one of his favorite terms. We can say that for him, all spiritual practice was meant to lead to this vyakulata, this tremendous agony of heart and tremendous longing, dying of thirst almost to realize God. And he said all of our spiritual practices are meant to increase that. So if we want to know how do we increase this longing for God, we have to do very regular spiritual practice. It seems to be a bit of a contradiction in terms. We want something spontaneous. We want something heart is overflowing. He said, but we don't have it. So then very routinely do your spiritual practice every morning, every evening, whatever it is, stick to that routine, bind yourself to a routine. This is what Sri Ramakrishna calls Vedhi Bhakti. He uses two terms, Vedhi Bhakti and Anuraga, or Raganuga Bhakti. He uses different terms, but that means in the beginning that we have to use this Purushakara. We have to use our self-effort. We have to be very regular in our spiritual practice. And we'll reach a stage when everything becomes spontaneous. And this Anuraga, this love of God, or love for truth, longing for realization, will become so dominant that we don't have to worry about doing a certain number of japa or sitting a certain length of time for meditation or anything like that. So if we want to have that real longing for God, we have to be very regular in our spiritual practice. It may sound boring and dull, but we have no other choice. And it will yield fruits. It does. We have to have that faith that if we do our japa and meditation and everything, that eventually that longing will grow. Now, the other way of looking at it, this is also very interesting, is that this longing grows through failure. This longing grows through failure. Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives a nice illustration. He says there's a bird that is flying around the harbor. The ships are there, and it feels very tired, so it lands on the mast of the ship and falls asleep. While it's sleeping, the ship goes out to sea. And it goes all the way out so far that when the bird wakes up, it doesn't know where the land is. It can't see land in any direction. So it thinks, let me fly in one direction. It flies as long as it can, doesn't see any land, and realizes it has to fly back before it gets too tired, and it flies back, and it rests a while and goes in every direction. And after not finding land in any direction, then it says, okay, now no more effort, no more Purushakara, now Sharanagati, I take refuge with the ship, and wherever the ship will take me, I'll go. So this is that stage beyond. First, we in Gita we have our two things. This yoga rudha. Those who are longing to reach the first stage, they have to use karma muchite. They have to work very hard. After that, shama. After that, we simply practice this sharanagati. We try to feel that grace. Even for the Advaitin, we have to reach that stage where the sense of I is gone. Now, once the heart is purified, sense of I is gone, then things become natural and spontaneous. Then there's no one to. Then I can't say now I've realized I am Brahman. That won't work. We only realize Brahman when this I is gone, and then that experience comes. Sri Ramakrishna says that we have to walk a great distance to get close to that magnetic mountain. We get close enough, then the magnet pulls us in. We don't do anything after that. Then shama karanam uchyate.
That is again wonderful, which you have advised for. It was both a question on vairagya, but of course Swamiji highlighted how vairagya can be achieved through 3 unique methods. Of course, the first one is something which we would not want anyone to undergo. That is tragedy upon the self on a person, which makes us think. For the second one was to draw inspiration from others, or understand how others are losing out on Vedanta, and then safeguard yourself. The third one, as Swamiji highlighted, he himself mentioned the importance of satsanga, the Mahapurusha Samshayaha. Bhagavad Padacharya tells about satsangatve nissangatvam. How Swamiji also mentioned about how Paramahamsa Sri Ramakrishna Swamiji also mentions about first having sadhu sangati and then going to solitude. So the satsangatve nissangatvam has coherence in Swami Ramakrishna's teachings as well. So moving on to our next question, Swamiji, in your ashram, you conduct this Pupils of Practical Vedanta, a course for Vedantic seekers. So what exactly is done in this course? A brief outline would be helpful for those who are interested to know about your ashram and the activities in ashram.
Okay. Yeah, Practical Vedanta is a concept that was emphasized by Swami Vivekananda, and it has different, we can understand it in different ways. Basically, it means putting Vedantic principles into practice, but for him, it was based on one concept, and that is that if that divine presence is the real nature of myself, it's the real nature of everyone. And if I want to worship God, the highest type of worship of God, Jiva Jnane, Jiva Seva, this is his famous statement, is service of other beings with the idea that I'm worshiping God dwelling within others. So this is why when Swamiji founded the Ramakrishna mission, that he gave us 2 ideals. One was Atmano Mokshatam, that it's for the sake of liberation. We want to have that highest illumination, realize the real nature of the self, and Jagat Hitaya Cha, and also for the welfare of the world. And but in that sense, that's also a type of spiritual practice and a type of worship. So service of others is raised to the form of worship. This is Swamiji's idea of practical Vedanta. So in the Ramakrishna order, very important part of it will be the social service work that we do. That means hospitals and dispensaries and orphanages and relief work whenever there's famine or flood or anything like that. So this is very prominent in all of our ashrams in India. In the West, because of our limited manpower, we haven't done too much. But in our center, a few years ago, we started a free medical clinic here, so that if anybody wants to come and they don't have insurance, they don't have a doctor, they don't have access, they can come here, and on a limited basis, of course. We can't do anything like surgery or anything, but they can get examined, they can get medical advice. Otherwise, we do things, service. We've volunteered in soup kitchens, and we collect food to distribute to the food banks and things like that. So on a limited basis. Problem in the West is mostly the limited manpower. In India, of course, we can draw on with something like 1,500 monks that can do this work. So India, of course, we're well known for being usually the first to be at any relief type of work, earthquake or anything like that. And of course, all of the funds that are raised, 100% will go for the relief work. We have no staff, we have no organization, no advertising costs or anything like that. Yeah. So this is practical Vedanta. So practical Vedanta really means if we really believe in the principles of Vedanta, we have to put them into practice in our lives. Theoretical knowledge won't help us very much. So even if we don't do any service to others, at least our interaction with other people, we should see the divinity dwelling within them. And we should feel oneness with everyone. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he makes a very nice distinction between what he calls Maya and Daya. And Maya has a special meaning in Bengali as attachment. So we have Maya for someone. Huh? This spell of Maya, we become very attached to them. Probably other languages also, they use it that way. But anyhow, he says that love of our own family members, it may extend to those of our own village, it may extend to those who speak the same language, or those of our same country, but anyhow, within a limited circle, it's a good thing, but it's limited. And he calls this Maya. He said, Daya is seeing that having feeling that same love for everyone. So this will be practical Vedanta. There was an incident in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. He was explaining to some of the disciples about these three teachings of Chaitanya Deva. One was Name Ruchi, that you have to have a taste for the name of God. Second was Vaishnava Seva, that serving other individuals, devotees. And the other was Jiva Daya. Jiva Daya, compassion for all living beings. Then Sri Ramakrishna, he went into this kind of ecstatic mood. And then after that, he said, no, who are you to show compassion to anyone? It is not compassion, it's love. You have to feel that the oneness. Who are we to show? So Swamiji took this and he said, what a great teaching. That compassion means that I'm looking down on somebody, I pity them. He said, no, it shouldn't be that way. That we should consider it a great blessing to be able to serve someone, seeing God in them. So he says, let the one who receives stand up, let the one who gives bow down. It shouldn't be the other way around. Someone who gives something, the other will bow down and thank them. He said, no, we should be grateful for the opportunity to serve someone. When he went to Rameshwaram, have you been?
Yes, I've been to Rameshwaram.
Did you notice at the main gate that there's on both sides, there's an engraving with part of the address that Swamiji gave.
Yes.
When Swamiji came back from the West on his first trip in 1897, the first place he landed, he went to in India, was Rameshwaram. And there was an address to him and he gave a reply. And in that, he said that if you think that the worship of Shiva and the Shiva Lingam is the most important thing, then you've missed the whole point. Real worship of Shiva is dwelling within all living beings. And I was so impressed when I saw it, that here a temple dedicated to ritualistic worship of Shiva Lingam, that on the outside they're saying that that's preliminary. Real worship is worship of Shiva dwelling within all beings. So this for Swamiji, this is really what practical Vedanta meant. That it doesn't do any good to say that God dwells within all beings, and then we show no respect or dignity to anybody, and we call them low class and uneducated and everything, look down upon them. That if we want to put it into practice, we have to stand before them with folded hands and see the divinity within them, And not just say, oh, I worship the divinity within you, but if they're suffering, our worship will be removing their suffering. If they're uneducated, our worship will be educating them. So this was a practical Vedanta.
That seems an eye opener for all of us, because Vedanta as a subject, as an academic discipline, is something, but when it comes to implementing it in our lives on the ground level, I think, as Swamiji mentioned, and of course Bhagavad Padacharya in his works like Bhajagovindam mentions about Deyam Dina Janaya Vittam. So he tells, he talks of the importance of mitigating the sufferings of poor. So this is something which Swamiji has. We are really happy to know that there's one such course where practical Vedanta is taught to students, not only theoretical. So
actually, Swamiji, many people said problem in India is all this Vedanta, and that meant nobody cared for anything about uplifting people or anything like that. And Swamiji said, no, problem is that not enough Vedanta, and it wasn't understood correctly, that it was never put into practice. That this is putting Vedanta into practice, that this will be beneficial to everyone, lift up everyone. Yeah.
So that really brings the limelight. I think we are in the end of our interview with Swamiji, but Swamiji has told something really important, that it's not only studying the Shastras or the scriptures. Mere scripture study is of no use. It's as preliminary as worshipping the Shivalinga. Maybe if I could put it that way. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Swamiji. But our bigger goal is to see oneness in all beings in this universe. The Sarvatmatma Bhava, which Bhagavad Padacharya tells in his Dakshinamurti Stotra, and seeking to reduce the sufferings and eliminate the sufferings of others. And in that process, cleansing our own self is something which Swamiji has highlighted. So Swamiji, we are moving to the last question. Before the last question, again, I submit my pranams to your holy feet and seek your permission to ask the final question. Swamiji, what's your final advice to the society and genuine seekers of Vedanta who want to make it through the transmigratory worldly existence and achieve liberation, self-realization and such things? What's your final advice to the society and the genuine seekers?
We have a concept in Vedanta called Nishtha. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he emphasizes this idea that all religions can lead us to the ultimate goal, that we see value and truth in everything, but Nishtha means that we have to choose one particular path for ourselves, and we have to stick to that and go very deep in that. He says it doesn't do good if trying to dig for water in different places. You dig for a while and then you get tired and you get some rock, you try another place, you get some sand, or you get bored, you try another place. We respect all traditions, but we have to find our own path. Now, our own path can incorporate others. Thakur talks about this Jnana Bhakti, that it can be a combination. In fact, Swami Vivekananda, he says the strongest spiritual path is synthesis of all the four yogas. That because we all have these different elements. We have an active element, so we want to be karma yogis. Then we have a feeling. We have our heart, so we want to have a little bit of devotion. And then we have our intellect. We want to be able to use that. And of course, concentration with the Raja Yoga. So we can combine all of these, but still, that'll give us one path to follow, and we have to stick to that, and we have to do that with a great devotion. And so I would say sincerity and perseverance. If we can have these things, there's perseverance and vyakulata. Now, these seem to be two opposite things. That on the one hand, we're saying that I can't live another second without God realization, and saying, but I'm willing to go 1,000 lifetimes without giving up if I don't get it. Both attitudes somehow have to be there. That yes, I do feel this tremendous longing for it, but I also know I won't give it up. That this is the one thing that's important to me. So we have to, first of all, practice a little bit of this vichara. We have to really analyze This when Sri Ramakrishna talks about vichara, he doesn't mean, and this sada sadvichara, he doesn't mean so much that God alone is real, the world is unreal, but what is really of value in life. And this idea of we read in Kathopanishad between Shreyas and Preyas. What will simply give us a little enjoyment in everything, but what will really be important in life. So we have to analyze very carefully that life is short. This is why Bhaja Govindam I like so much. The death is right around the corner, today or tomorrow. And one day we'll look back on this life and say, did I waste it? Or did I utilize it? Did I have an ideal? Swamiji says, have an ideal in life. We may make 1,000 mistakes. Those without an ideal in life will make 1,000,000 mistakes. At least have some ideal, have something to live for. And we find that this is the most satisfying type of life. Whether we achieve God realization or we don't achieve it, doesn't matter. I mean, that, of course, we're striving for that. But we find that this spiritual life and following the spiritual path is rewarding on its own. We don't have to wait till the end. The journey itself is rewarding. We find that what a beautiful way to live one's life, thinking about the welfare of others, trying to lead a life without selfishness, trying to lead a life where always trying to get as much enjoyment as possible, leading a life with a high ideal, understanding that right now I don't know who I am, I don't know the real nature of this world, that I don't want to waste this opportunity. I want to find out who am I really, what is the real nature of the self, that this is a blessed opportunity, we don't want to waste it. So if we can get people to be a little reflective and tell them, one day you'll reach the end of your life, and you'll look back on that life, and will you be satisfied that you did something worthwhile or accomplished something? Now, part of it, of course, if we lead a dharmic life, this is also important. But in terms of this eternal life, have we done anything that will bring us closer to that real goal of life, of illumination, God realization, however we understand it?
Yes, Swamiji, thank you so much for your message. If I could sum it up, Swamiji has stressed on the importance of sincerity and perseverance. He also mentioned about Vyakulata, the longingness, or if I could put it as longingness. And also he mentioned how it's important to have an ideal, a goal in our life. And also how important it is for us to realize the value of the human birth, which even Swamiji has told at the beginning of the interview as well. At the same time, even though realizing the value and also questioning ourselves whether we are working towards the goal, the higher goal or not, is also something which Swamiji indicated. So Swamiji, this is a great message, a wholesome diet, if I could say, for Vedantic seekers. I would sum up with this. Thank you so much for your time and cooperation for this interview, Swamiji. We really look forward for more such talks and pravachans by Swamiji and on Advaita Academy. And this was indeed insightful, and we are very happy that our viewers have got a great message from Swamiji. Apart from Vedantic truths, we also learned about practical Vedanta, how important is seva in even in a Vedantic pursuit. So thank you very much, Swamiji. Thank you very much for your time. Once again, I and myself, Abhinand, and my colleague Manu, we both do our pranams to your lotus feet, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thanks for all the help you have done to us.
And I thank you for the invitation. Wonderful questions, and I enjoyed the session. So, yeah.